Last panel discussion here, last panel discussion of today. Just a few words about what was said. So Artie talked about mainly two personal projects that were between material and immaterial, image objects and the series exploits. He described his way of working. He talked about the way he makes his work shift and also address the participative aspect of his practice. Whereas Marlie talked about good old smelly cigarettes in an age of electronic smoking, could you say, as a start, but also, of course, of her practice mainly, and the practice that deals with, we could say, simulation in a way, but also circulation and distribution. I have a first question, maybe, as I always have the microphone, I always take the opportunity of asking the first question, and it is for Artie, sorry. You described the shift of your artworks by using the word altered. Isn't there a kind of negative implication with that word? Am I wrong?
I don't think necessarily. I don't think of it as a pejorative or anything. I mean, I think altered is mostly used as a descriptor. I mean, if I said something like photoshopped, for example, I think that is too specific about the technology that I would be using, and then yeah, I don't know. I don't think that, to me, there's anything negative about alter or altern or alterity or altered at all. So yeah.
What could be the position of the object from one stage to the other? Yeah, of course, but you have to go close.
Like that.
What could be the new meaning of the object if it's altered? What is its new position confronting to the old one?
Well, I think a lot of the purpose is to make it so that, in fact, they're one and the same. They may not look the same at all. They may be completely aesthetically different, but they're kind of treated as the same singular work. Each time I make kind of a physical image object sculpture, or print, however you want to call them, I don't really have an answer for that myself. I give it the title of when it was first saved in Photoshop. So this, for instance, image object, like what day is it even? Like image object, Friday, 6 December 2013, 5:40 p.m. could be one. And whenever they circulate also in the documentation, they're also referred to as that. So it's very explicitly about this object, which you may have seen in a gallery space, or you may not have ever, you may never see one, is one and the same with the documentation.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Would Federica or Elise want to ask a question? I have other questions.
Yeah, thanks you two for a great presentation. And I'm really sorry in advance if I need to go back to this, but Artie, you started your talk by saying that many artists from your generation, and I include Marlie with that, want to distantiate themselves from a term such as post-internet, but I think it's still relevant to discuss and maybe define a bit more what it means. And I think we could say that this term was coined in 2009, 2010 by you and other people. But still, I think it's interesting that it's been historicized already 3 years later, not even, and that people are already wanting to step back. In that sense, I understand it. I understand this problem because, for me, it became obsolete as a term, mainly because probably a new generation of artists has recycled some aesthetics that were going on at the time and have been going on since then, thanks to or because of this over-circulation of the image. And maybe this new generation of artists who are younger than you are using the aesthetics and recycling the formal aspect of that, if we can say maybe a trend, but emptied of this critical discourse. That's my guess why it might be an annoying term, but I also agree with you when you say it's dangerous to generalize or title things. However, I still think that your text was extremely important and still very relevant today, because it doesn't, I think maybe I'd like to know why, you know, why you want to step back. I'm not saying it's a bad idea, but I think it's maybe interesting that I also know that, you know, I never considered Marlie as a post-internet artist. I don't like to say that this or this artist is post-internet. However, there is a huge debate that's going on. I also noticed that if Freeze magazine is dedicating its current issue to the question, it means that it's being institutionalized, and that we cannot ignore that people are either trying to step back or jump in, but people love to talk about it. And I'm not sure that in the Swiss art context we're very aware of this debate, mostly because I would say, if I may generalize, that the Swiss artistic practice is not dealing with exactly the same ideas as maybe Berlin or New York at the moment. But still, it would be nice if we can just discuss a little bit more the problem about the post-internet.
Sure, okay, it could be difficult. Let me think. Well, okay, so I think one of the main reasons, and you say, you know, when I say I want to, I'm stepping back, or that I have stepped back, for instance, from the term post-internet, I don't think I've publicly aligned myself or self-identified myself as post-internet since 2010, despite the fact that people have written it about me, even as recently as in December. I think that part of the reason for potentially wanting to step back is that I think, again, I think a neologism can be dangerous, and I think in general it deals with, it's almost such an overbroad term that deals with what I perceive as a general, almost sea change in art production. These things, for instance, you know, I stand by my essay, for example, of course, and the statements that I make in it. However, I think that when I say it's like a sea change or a paradigm shift or something like that, I think that all art practice at this point has to come to terms, kind of like Marlie was saying, actually, that everyone kind of knows that these things are going to live as images, for example. Am I? I think it's all right. Okay. I think that's a yes if no one said anything. Let's see. But then I also think, you know, things like the Freeze article are concerning as well, because you have also individuals such as Josh Klein, or institutions like, not institutions, but, you know, places like 47 Canal or Real Fine Arts in New York being identified as post-internet, or either artists of post-internet or sites of where post-internet things are happening, when they have never self-identified as such, and in fact have quite a bit of difference, I guess, with them. I'm not sure if that answers your question adequately. That sounds like a no.
No, yeah, no, it does. Actually, I mean, you probably know, I absolutely agree with you. I guess, I mean, from the beginning, I always thought that was the wrong term. But however, it describes a general condition that any artist working with any media is facing. I guess that's just a condition that everyone is using the internet as a source material, but as any...
Is that a condition?
Well, it's just not only artists, I would say, like doctors, politicians, any person living in our society is using
My dentist is post-internet.
Totally, yeah. Yeah, absolutely agree. And that's why I'm talking about a general condition.
Yeah.
And rather than, I guess, coining a term. We should just.
So why do we have to like then over and over and over discuss it? Even start an MA about it in London, you know? It's like
I don't know, because there was
to over discuss it even more.
Something actually happened, I guess, in 2010 when Artie released this essay, and people started talking about it.
It was you.
No, it wasn't me. I can't take credit for this. I mean, no, really. I mean, like Marissa Olson coined the term, and then it was mostly popularized by Jean McHugh, who wrote a popular blog called Post-Internet that was funded by the Andy Warhol Foundation. So, I wrote an essay about it.
No, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
No, just to get that straight. Yeah.
I suppose, Marlie, I was going to ask you if you wanted to add something to the discussion, but probably the answer is...
For myself, I've never seen myself as a post-internet artist, but then suddenly, I mean, it's a little bit over now, but I think a lot of people started to put me in exhibitions that they coined as post-internet exhibitions, and then suddenly this started rolling and rolling, and I had nothing to do with it, because I'd always been making objects, and then suddenly there was this sort of, more interested into making objects again, and then, I don't know, these two boats met or something. Then I ended up in the same boat. It was super weird. But now then I just started to say no, no, no. And then slowly then you're out of it again. So it's also, I think it's just illustrating in that way how it's about choosing who you associate with and who you don't. And like, I think that's much more interesting, the whole networking idea, the whole, how context and network is a material in itself, how me being social, how me being here is part of the whole network and part of my work and is a material, and that these are objects that I'm making, but they're only like a small fraction of what I'm doing, and I know what everybody is doing, etc. It's like sort of a governing of style over all of those different things, and it's not just over how you're being a craftsman or how coining yourself as an internet or net or post-internet artist, etc. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I think your answer was very interesting and showed that your question was also interesting and had sense, because of course this symposium also wants to answer that kind of questions. Maybe, yeah, about your work. I was interested in the work about the smoke on the sociological dimension of it, and kind of observation of a moment that is like that today, that was very, very different 10 years ago, and that is going to be very different in 10 years. Is that aspect important to you, or is it just a coincidence?
The smoking?
Yeah.
Ah, okay. Well, I think the smoking for me, it wasn't necessarily that I was so interested in smoking, but I think smoking really, really beautifully in a very clear red line allowed me to associate with an object that I could trace back chronologically very clearly. So, I mean, it's not as if I have a problem with smoking, yes or no, I don't know. The first exhibition I did about smoking was quite funny, because it was in Berlin, and there was a rumor that I actually hated people that smoked, and so everybody'd smoke cigarettes at the station and then came to the exhibition and they saw me or other people smoking, and it just all became this really banal situation when obviously I hadn't initiated any sort of a smoking ban whatsoever. And so I'd also supplied at the same time, unconsciously, people with small talk topic, you know, because they were all like, I started smoking when I was 14, me when I was 16, oh, me was when I was 25, and this was the whole situation, the whole evening through. It was really funny. For the rest, there was nothing much to see except for a small poem, and it wasn't planned like this at all. But no, so I don't think it's really about the smoking, but it's more like, I don't know, I studied architectural theory, and I think there I've seen quite a lot of how architectural theoreticians are looking at engineering and how they're tracing back, for example, let's look at the elevator, let's trace this all the way back to when it's invented by whatever, Mr. Otis or something, I think his name was. And in that sort of a similar way, I think later I sort of saw this association in this way of thinking. I'm tracing back an object. So it's always been an object that's used to control people. When the Europeans came to America, it was a way to control Native Americans, because they saw it as their responsibility to smoke tobacco, because bringing smoke up into the air was a way to communicate with the spirits, for example. So gaining control over starting to own their land or taking over their land. In that way, they also gain control over these people's bodies, etc., etc. So I don't know, it's just from then on you can just trace different public and social and personal individual opinions towards this very immaterial and transient sort of a habit, and very banal, as a super banal topic in a sense.
All right, thank you. Are there some questions from the audience? Yes, there was a question.
Hello. I have a question for Marlie. What do you mean by, and I'm quoting you, by being fake, they tell more about the object from the object itself?
Yeah? Okay, this is a really great question. I think that it's, if I bring stuff from outside that I'm finding into the gallery space, that's great, but I think by making them, in the sense that also how you walk around this museum and you look at these dioramas, for example, they're saying much more about the real than, you know, I'm copying the real into something fake, and thereby, you know, highlighting it as a construction, as a material construction, etc. I think that its artificiality makes it more real than the actual real could be. Do you know what I mean? No.
Sort of.
Sort of, okay. Well, I think if I'm putting together a lot of different parts into a construction, into a piece, into an object, it's collecting narrative, and it's because it's all so carefully placed, it's quite obviously fake. And I think the fact that I'm accumulating narrative within one object is becoming more and more clear by making it myself.
There was another question from Angelo. Okay.
It's excuse me for interrupting. It's just a kind of comment on the last question and the response. I think Artie also mentioned talking about immaterial and material, and it's a classic philosophical question. And we could think of virtual and actual, which is a bit more what I think you're saying. What is there on the floor in the gallery is actual. And the virtual and the actual are, as Proust told us and Deleuze tells us, are both as real as each other. What you're working with is the actual, and producing different instantiations or actualizations of a virtual underlying virtual. Let's leave it at virtual. I don't want to specify it too much. So that's really what's interesting. That it's a simulation, yeah, okay. But it's that you actualize something which is underlying or interwoven in the virtual. And the same is what Artie's doing as well, saying he wants to remove the fixed original object and just work with the virtual, but he can only do that through the actual, which are altered forms of his now invisible virtual.
Right.
They're both real.
Yeah.
It's not a question of reality. They're both real.
Sure.
Simulations are real.
Sure. But like by highlighting that, by highlighting that even more as a construction, I think it's becoming even more. I don't know. It's exaggerating this divide, which is, like you say, not a divide, right?
Yeah. You're working with that. You're working with that realm in that that liminal space really between nice actual and virtual.
Yeah, it's a nice crossover between our practices. So it's nice you point that out.
Sure. Yeah, I think what is interesting to me about that, specifically about your statement, that you think it, I forget how you phrased it exactly, but they tell that these kind of manufactured objects tell more than the found object would, in a way. It's funny because I wouldn't have personally thought of it that way, I suppose, but I understand the way in which, in a way, I guess you're constructing a symbolic object. Then, you know, you're constructing this this thing and putting this.
It's always an arrangement, an accumulation of. I mean, I could take these things here that are scattered on the ground and place them into the gallery. I'm doing exactly the same as that I'm doing in my objects, but I don't know. From some sort of a sculptural intuitive, I feel I should sort of, I don't know, arrange them in
Right. I mean, and that's why I say I definitely understand that. Just the reason, I think one of the reasons that I bring it up is because specifically with something like the Exploits project that I started, the reason that I'm, there's such a hefty and long tradition of, and significant tradition of appropriation, for example, of different cultural artifacts and different objects. And I think that for me, it was more interesting to, if I hadn't licensed those patents, if I had just kind of appropriated, if I'd taken, like Googled some patent and found it and said, okay, I'm gonna make objects based on that, I wouldn't have actually been engaging with the thing itself. I would be making a work about intellectual property as opposed to making a work using intellectual property. So I think that, yeah, just the methods are different, probably.
I was wondering about that though, because like, how far do you go with filtering out? Like, I don't know, you go to eBay and you search for a patent, and then you look for one that's cheap or one that's cool, or what? How are you working?
I looked through. I was kind of trying to find anything that where I could actually have up-to-date contact information for anybody, which was surprisingly hard. And I kind of, to begin the project, I happened upon a screen and a shelf, basically, which I thought was a pretty interesting combination to start with, because a screen is this thing that you look through, and a shelf is something that is just meant to hold other things. So they're both kind of filigrees, I guess.
Thanks.
You have another question? Yeah, Angelo would like to ask a question.
I want to ask Marlie first, because I see a lot of allegories in your work with how the internet, like the clouds, the oversharing, it's very, very, apart from the aesthetic part, I see a lot of metaphors. Do you see the internet as an ashtray? And then maybe Artie also can speak a bit.
Oh yeah, great. Wowie. So then it would be a dump space.
Exactly. I mean, we post like something on Instagram like 1 hour ago, and then next day it's like a,
But that's true, because you're never gonna, if you're smart, like you're never gonna put your best on the internet, right?
Yes. Anymore. Yeah.
No, I mean it's the 98%, but not the 100. I mean, you keep that for you. I don't know. So in that sense, it is a type of a junk space. Yeah. Especially when it comes to social networks. And yeah. And then there's ash and residues and all of this kind of things. I don't know, I used to run an online publishing project called XYM. It's www.xym.no, and it's a place where I would upload PDFs that I'd asked artists to do. And they'd all be registered with ISBN numbers in the Norwegian National Library. And the moment that I uploaded them, I would also decide when they would go offline again. So it could be an hour, it could be 2 weeks, could also be 10 years, whatever, anything in between. So like eBay, and also the image of the thing would shrink. And then at the bottom of the page, there's just now, well, it's over now, so there's just the graveyard left, and it's just some ash literally at the bottom of the page. But our idea at the time was we just didn't want to make another website where you come to this giant archive and you don't know where to start and don't know where to stop. And so it was just a way to keep the freshest stuff and the coolest stuff at the top and the losers at the bottom, and like whatever. Like, I don't know. It was just a way to sort of make it maybe less like an ashtray or something, Sort of always keep the cigarette burning or something like this. If you want to use another allegory, I don't know. Yeah.
And Artie?
Me too. I don't know. I mean, it's hard to say exactly, because obviously the internet becomes this place where there's just a ton of meaningless information or a ton of spam, junk space, and just, or even where all of this, what we could kind of deem meaningful information gets overwhelmingly lost in just a sea of other good things also. But I don't think I would go so far as to say it's like an ashtray. I guess. I don't know. I think it's just a reflection of life, like someone was saying, or it's not a reflection of life. It's a component of life, and life is messy, and so is everything.
It's more like plumbing. I don't know. It's just like an extension of pipes and whatever.
The internet is a series of tubes. Did you really just say that? Okay.
Thank you. Are there some other questions in the audience? Maybe a last one? Maybe okay, there's one.
So I've been listening to the questions. They're all very well-behaved questions, and it seems everyone is dying with intent and interest. Is anyone, like, who's been here all day have questions about the validity of this discussion at all? Like questioning the whole thing? Maybe it's all bullshit and we're all full of ourselves and it doesn't make any sense? Or...
Sounds like you've got a question.
Sorry?
Sounds like you've got a question.
No, I'm really curious to hear what, you know, you get into these meta discussions and stuff, and I'm just curious to hear from the students, like, what's your general impression, or big questions that we haven't touched on or should be touched on, or, you know?
So there is a question or an answer. Over there. Si vous pouvez lever la main comme ça. Voilà. Je suis un peu fatigué.
It's not exactly a question like to question validity of the symposium, but I had a general question for the panel in general. Is when we talk about the post-digital art, is it about an art that is going back to being just conceptual, and concepts can be political or social, or about a subject that interests an artist, or an artist that changes the paradigm of his own art? Is it about being conceptual, being just about concepts?
So for us that organized also the symposium together with Patrick, we actually don't have just one answer. And what we tried to do was to invite people with very different positions, also conflicting ones, so there is not a general agreement on one definition. And we've been also discussing a lot about this title, PostDigital Cultures, and I think we can say that it kind of stick to the project some point. We couldn't find something defining it better, so there is an idea that compared to this pioneer phase of the internet that started in the 1990s, something has changed. We wanted to invite people to contextualize that and to put it into a perspective, but the reactions are extremely different, and we really wanted that. So we really wanted individual positions, and we wanted discussions about that, more than a clear definition about it.
Yeah, it's true. I think we agreed from the beginning that we wanted to be highly speculative and raise questions rather than answer anything. Also, I would think that the panelists just reflect not only different positions, but just the general state of the art as it's always been, like very different practices, ideas, and concepts, as you mentioned. I personally would say that we never actually escaped conceptual art, but again, I think it's difficult to coin anything as, you know, one tendency or one style. For the same reason, probably the term post-internet doesn't work, and for the same reason, post-digital culture is a very bad title, arguably. But again, I think, yeah, if the intention was just to bring people to have interesting and meaningful conversations, yeah, that could be. I hope this answers your question.
All right, thank you. I don't know if you want to add something to the subject. No. Excellent. So thank you very much again, Artie. Thank you, Marlie. And thank you to everybody that has been here the whole day and listened to the different sessions that we had. I'd like to invite you now to join us at the opening of the festival Les Urbaines, which takes place near the station, the train station, at 6:30. And I invite you to come back tomorrow for the 2 last sessions of this symposium. Thank you very much and have a nice evening.